Thank you as always, sir. We so appreciate you. And now Shelley McMillan has our inspiration for today. Shelley?
Right. Good afternoon. Well, looking ahead just a few days, I realize that it is going to be Mother's Day. So I have selected something for all of the mothers and for all of their children, which then means it means all of you. So this is lyrics taken from Stephen Sondheim's musical Into the Woods. It's from Children Will Listen, as sung by the witch. Careful the things you say, children will listen. Careful the things you do, children will see and learn. Guide them along the way, children will glisten. Children will look to you for which way to turn, to learn what to be. Careful before you say, listen to me. Children will listen. Careful the wish you make. Wishes are children. Careful the path they take. Wishes come true, not free. Careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell will last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. Children will listen. Thank you.
You beautiful, Shelley. Next time you can sing that for us. And now Ingrid Sheldon has a beautiful rendition of one of her favorites to do with us when we're in the Anderson room, Esperanza Spalding singing On the Sunny Side of the Street. Lori?
Esperanza Spalding.
Well, Europe gave us classical music, and jazz is America's classical music. Where blues was born in the farms and fields of the South, jazz is urban cool. So I'm gonna sing a song for you that has been sung for more than 6 decades, and it has a message for hope. Originally, this was sung during the Great Depression when the end was not in sight. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you try living on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk in the shade with my blues on parade, but I'm not afraid. It's over, passing right over. Grab your head and grab your coat. Leave your worries on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear the pitter-pat? And that happy tune in your step. Life could be so sweet on the sunny side of the street. I used to walk, I admit, in the shade with my blues on parade, but I'm not afraid. It's over, passing right over. If I never had one cent, I'd be rich as Rockefeller. Stardust at my feet, oh, the sunny side of the street. Oh, baby. said I'd be rich. Probably he's not the richest one anymore, but at least I've had some gold dust at my feet on the sunny, on the shady, on the sunny side of the street.
Yeah, all right. If that doesn't make your heart glad, I don't know what will. Nothing like music. We are a singing club, so new people, get used to it. We love it. I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. I know that the Zoom meetings are getting a little challenging. We're going into month 15, and here we are. So stick with us, stick with me, and you're going to be sticking with President-elect Susan. Stick with us. We are doing good work. Okay, thank you as always. Manning the mothership, Lori Walters, and today she's assisted by Don Duquette and Ashok Natwa. And filling very big shoes, Michael Field is standing in as photographer for Fred Beutler. So thank you, Michael. Marcia Chamberlain is getting our minutes for the Harpoon. And Dan Romanchik is taking attendance. So please put your name in chat. So make his job a little easier. I do have some sad news to report. You may have already heard this news, but our dear, dear Bob Dascola lost his wife, Mary Summers, a week ago. I spoke with Bob. He was cutting hair. And Mary passed away after over a 3-year battle with cancer. So our heart goes out to them both. I had the delight of meeting her when she bid on the Pearson Practically Painless Pilates party back when I was doing them with our GTO. And I think it might've been the first one she came to. She was a doll. So again, to Bob and their whole family. So I always like to follow that up with birthdays. We need the celebrations. I need them. May 5, Chris Mile. May 7, soon to be director, John Sepp. May 8th, Phil Clintworth. And May 10, Wayne Colquitt. Happy birthday to all of those. I just have 2 announcements. One, you would have gotten an email that says your dues are due. And we bumped up the timeline on this for the reasons that we have to pay Rotary International and the district dues every year for July 1 membership. And so we need to know who our membership are, not sure what the grammar is there, but anyway, by June 30. So your dues are now due June 1. So please, we also have the ACH option, and you can get with Lori about doing that. So I thank you for that. And now, Saturday in the park. Dan Romanchik and Mary Avocados have decided they're going to start, since most of us are getting those vaccines, to meet on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. in a park. This Saturday, Dan's going to put the info in the chat. They're meeting at Veterans Park under the pavilion at 9 a.m. I will not be there because I'm going to a Pearson family wedding. But anyway, you all, 9 a.m. this Saturday, Dan's bringing Washtenaw dairy donuts and coffee. So there's the scoop. And so hopefully we can start getting together and seeing each other. And with that, I will turn this over to the chair of our Rotary Fights Summer Hunger Drive, Todd Caphart, who's got some really great news. Todd?
Thank you very much, President Joanne and my fellow Rotarians. We concluded our 17th annual food drive with a record high in meals gathered. Typically, we partner with our local food bank food gatherers to place collection boxes throughout the county. But given the realities of the pandemic, this year's drive was conducted virtually. Fortunately, we still had the Harold and Kay Peplau donation match in place. I mentioned during the food drive kickoff meeting that since last March, food gatherers partners have reported up to 300% increase in people seeking assistance, and that 40% of visitors had never used a food pantry before. Our goal for this year was a very ambitious 150,000 meals, reflecting the depth of the need. Because of the generosity of our club members and the community, I am proud to announce that we raised 155,706 meals for the hungry in our community. I usually mention in these remarks that Food Gatherers thanks you all very much and would like me to remind you that their annual Grillin' event will be held at the Washtenaw Farm Council grounds, but of course, Grillin' will be canceled again this year, making our contributions even more critical. I'd like to thank the members of the Rotary Fight Summer Hunger Committee, Charlie Crone, Norman Herbert, Steve Kessler, Greg Staskill, and Elizabeth Trin, along with Carter Good from Ypsilanti Rotary for all their hard work to make this year a success. We're always looking to expand the drive, so if you'd like to join our committee and help us next year, or if you know someone who works for an employer in the area that you think might be interested in participating in next year's drive, please let one of us know. Thank you.
Todd Kephart, thank you for your leadership on this. It's a very important event. All of the needs are even greater this year. That is fantastic. Congratulations, Rotarians. And we'll do it again next year. And so now it's a very, very exciting time for us where we honor our Paul Harris Fellow Awards for starters. And our secretary, Barbara Eichmuller, has those names for us. Barbara?
Thank you, President Joanne, and Lori's put up the slides for us. The Paul Harris Fellow recognition acknowledges individuals who contribute or have contributions made in their name of $1,000 to the Rotary Foundation. Rotary established the recognition in 1957 to encourage and show appreciation for substantial contributions to what was then the Foundation's only program, the Rotary Foundation Fellowships for Advanced Study. This year, there are 22 members in our Paul Harris Fellow class, with 5 new fellows who are noted in gold on the slide. Over the years, our club and its members have given more than $1.1 million to the Rotary Foundation's annual programs fund, Every Rotarian Every Year, and Polio Plus. So please join me in acknowledging this year's Paul Harris Fellows. They are Eric Baker, Don Duquette, Jim Egredell, Susan Fraley, Larry Hasty, Rick Ingram, Jim Irwin, Todd Kephart, David Karen, Sarah Maddock, Rosemary Mikulinski, Dave McDowell, Glenna Miller, Robert Northrup, Mark Wimet, Joanne Pearson, Rosemarie Roney, Dave Schmidt, Leo Shedden, Cynthia Sorensen, Mary Stefik Blasky, and Yolanda Whitten. Thank you all for your commitment to Rotary. And now I turn the screen over to Norman.
Thank you, Barbara. President Joanne and fellow Rotarians, it's my honor representing the Development Committee to recognize those that have made cumulative contributions of $1,000 or more to reach the initial level for recognition today as sustaining society members, as well as those that are benefactors, assembly, and legacy circle donors. The Ann Arbor Rotary Endowment is a perpetual charitable fund. It was initiated in 1985 within the Ann Arbor Rotary Foundation structure. It qualifies as a 501c3 organization under the IRS rules so that contributions are tax deductible. The Endowment Fund is managed by a board of trustees. Its primary purpose is to provide annually additional funds for our club support of nonprofit community organizations, activities, and projects over and above that is provided by our annual member assessment for charitable activities. Our foundation is both a true endowment, holding funds in perpetuity, and using the income therefrom to support designated charitable activities, and our club's tax-exempt vehicle through which we raise and distribute other funds in support of such activities. It must be remembered, however, that the activities and causes that are funded through the foundation are primarily focused on youth, and these are adopted by the club as official club projects. The foundation currently has a spending policy that requires an annual distribution of 4.25% of the assets each year, and that is based on an average market value for the preceding 20 quarters. As a result of contributions to the foundation, as well as good investment results, the amount distributed over the last 15 years totals almost $872,000. The average increase in the annual distribution approximates 6% a year. The Foundation Endowment Fund had a market value of $2.9 million on March 31st, and this is up almost $1 million given the rebound in the market over the last year, which was impacted by COVID-19 pandemic market value, and this fund now provides a distribution that represents 42% of our annual community service budget. Increases in future years will be based on the market value of the fund. While our annual community service fees are critical in the support of these current programs, our gifts to the foundation help secure those programs for tomorrow. We invite each of our club members to invest in the future by making a gift from either your current assets, including your IRA for those that are over 70 and a half, or by designating a portion of your estate for distribution to the foundation upon your death, a bequest. Donated funds are invested permanently to build a long-term stable support for our many humanitarian projects, saving lives and improving health and well-being of those less fortunate abroad, and providing educational opportunities and other improvements in the lives of our young people locally. In calendar year 2020, 151 gifts were received, totaling almost $28,000, which are additions to the foundation value. The support is recognized with a Sustainer Society pin for those with cumulative giving of $1,000 or more. And this year, we wish to recognize, as is shown on the screen, Dale Berry, Robert Northrup, Patricia Pooley, and Yolanda Whitten. For those providing cumulative giving of $10,000 or more, and or those donors who notify their trustees that his or her will or trust includes a gift to the foundation of at least $10,000, we want to recognize two of our members this year, Thomas Kuiper and Agnes Pearson-Redding. And for those that provide either cumulative giving of $25,000 or more, and or provide in their trust or will a gift for the foundation, the club's foundation, of at least that $25,000, we want to recognize those Legacy Circle members. And this year, we're privileged to be able to recognize Nishta Bhatia. Thanks to each of you for your continuing support. If we were together, we would provide you with the appropriate pin. Hopefully, we can do that next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Excuse me. And thank you to all. We so appreciate this because it is indeed how we do our good works. So again, our heartfelt thanks. And you can see everything happening with our work through community allocations, and we've got stuff happening in international humanitarian projects, IHPC, that's a mouthful. Lots of good work. Our Strive kids who we saw last week, so much good stuff going on. So as I say, stick with me. I know 15 months on Zoom. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Marcia Chamberlain to introduce our speaker. Marcia? We can't hear. Can you all hear Marcia? I can't hear her.
I can't hear.
How about if I unplug? Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, because I was just saying I got this fancy message on my screen. I mute myself and I thought I had. So it is my pleasure on behalf of the Rotary Art Committee, the Anti-Racism Committee, to welcome Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton today. As we all know, with the last year of heightened awareness of police procedures over the last year, there really is a movement for change in practices. And so Sheriff Clayton will be discussing all those changes with us, but he has a long and impressive background in work in this area. He is serving his third term as sheriff of Washtenaw County, leading an organization of approximately 420 people. He has provided training and subject matter expertise to both the public and private sector, including various sheriff's offices and police departments throughout the country. He's involved with the National Sheriff's Association, has done this work with the American Civil Liberties Union, and has served on monitoring teams to assess police agency compliance with U.S. Department of Justice consent decrees and memorandum of agreement. Excuse me. He's also received a great deal of international recognition as he has worked as a representative of U.S. law enforcement on an international basis with programs in community policing. He was a member of the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights, our representative from the United States. And in 2008, he participated in a US-UK exchange focusing on building leadership for fair and effective policing. He is a leader in his field, and we are happy to have him here today to lead us into conversation on the topic of 21st century policing. Sheriff Clayton, welcome.
I'm not clear that Sheriff Clayton is on the call yet. Sheriff, are you there? Oh, I do not see him. I just emailed his secretary or his assistant, I'm sorry, his executive assistant. So this is
we will welcome him.
this is new, unless he's here as on a phone, but he's still not responding.
Well, you can just talk amongst yourselves.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
This is Yolanda Whiten, and interrupt me if Sheriff Clayton comes on. Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Okay, so I'd just like to say that I worked with Sheriff Clayton. I'm just going to talk about him until he comes, I guess. But I did work with Sheriff Clayton on a particular project that was federally funded over 3 years by the Office of Minority Health, and it was about preventative measures for women who were in danger of possibly being abused in some sort of way. And one of the things that Sheriff Clayton did was offer a law enforcement perspective on it in several workshops throughout Washtenaw and Wayne County to help facilitate an understanding of how much policing matters in these instances. And so not only do they show up at a call, but their insight into it is not always wrong. You know, lately we've been hearing a lot about policemen showing up at things where perhaps a different sort of person may need to come. And so I would just like to say that many times, while that is true, that's not always true, because a situation can change quickly. And when that happens, it is good to have someone on hand who understands. I think that the important part is to make sure that they don't overreact or be afraid to allow a situation to de-escalate. And one of the things we might ask Sheriff Clayton about is that, because that's something that he always emphasizes, allowing de-escalation to occur as it is necessary. So did he come yet? I was just trying to fill in there for a moment.
Apparently he's getting off another Zoom to get on with us. He was probably figuring 1 o'clock and we
Yeah.
were a smidge ahead of
Oh,
agenda.
Yeah, we're a little bit ahead on the agenda, so we'll just have to occupy ourselves for another couple of minutes.
Thank you, Yolanda, for filling us in on that. That's
Not surprised that he's busy.
That's right. There's no problems at all in Washtenaw County.
yeah, I didn't even read you all of the boards he's on and so on and so forth, but he has a very impressive involvement in our local community in ways besides being a sheriff.
He was on my board too, and I think he's on Barbara Niece's board now. I think so.
Yes, that's where I first.
So I mean, he helps us all a lot, and so he's probably just on another call helping somebody right now, but he has helped us quite a bit.
Barbara did put in the chat that he's on her board at Safe House Center.
Yes.
Okay, Sheriff is joining now.
Terrific.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll let you handle it, Marcia.
You want me to repeat all that?
Welcome. Sheriff Clayton, are you here? Oh, there you are.
There he is.
Okay. Welcome.
Hi, how's everybody?
We're good. Sheriff Clayton, you just missed a long, stellar introduction, but I refuse to repeat it. But it's very nice to see you again. We're very glad to have you here, and we're just going to let you hold forth from here on out. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. Hold on, let me get situated. I was looking at my my calendar and it said 1 o'clock. So I said, all right, well,
yeah,
the whole thing starts at 1. I looked up and like, oh my God, it already started. So look, I'm really happy to be here. Pleased to join you. I appreciate getting the opportunity to share a little time with you and share my voice. I know I got 30 minutes. You are right on, maybe less than that now. So what I want to do is just sort of provide some context and then leave some time for some questions, hopefully, and hopefully this will be interactive. So I know our conversation, the focus is on police reform and all the stuff that's been going on. But before I do that, before I get to the reform part, I think it's really important to set some context. You know, how did we get here? We didn't get here overnight. There's a long history. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's been demands, right, on police accountability for dozens and dozens of years. And I'll just reference certain sections of the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. And that act that was passed and signed by in the law authorized the Justice Department to investigate agencies, right, to bring action against state, city, local law enforcement agencies that where there was an allegation of an organization being engaged in patterns and practices of conduct that violated people's constitutional rights, the rights of individuals. And in the law enforcement space, that really stayed a lot in management practices around training, supervision, and a large focus on excessive force. So during that era, that was the same era that all the cops legislation came out. So that was signed in the law by Clinton. All the cops legislation came out, but they put that piece in there to hold agencies accountable. And since then, the Justice Department, up until the Trump era, was fairly active in the whole police accountability space. before I got elected, I actually worked on a monitoring team that was part of for Detroit Police Department, an agency that had been under consent decree for about a dozen years. But let's go back a little deeper. Let's talk a little bit about historically poor and to some degree abusive relationship between people of color, specifically African Americans, and police. I mean, that's part of why we're seeing what we've been seeing for all this time. And I think it's important for us to really remember the historical relationship between people of color and law enforcement, especially African Americans, because that history goes back so far. So I want to go all the way back to, and here's why I want to go back here, because I don't think we can really talk about reforms. I don't think we can really talk about how we evolve as a society, how the profession evolves without understanding the historical context of how we got here. And how that experience, although there's nobody on this call or any other call that can speak to what I'm going to start talking to that was there, that still has transcended generation to generation. So let's go as far back as 1700s, right? Let's go as far back as the slave patrols in the Carolina colonies in 1700, right? Where those slave patrols were used to track down runaway slaves under the color of law. So when you really start thinking about when we had these folks that were enforcing the law, it happened way back when. I want to read something to you. So every year or every 4 years I get elected, I do I swear oath, all my staff to an oath, right? You know, I, Jerry Clayton, do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Michigan, and to perform my duties to the best of my ability, so help me God. That's all police officers, they swear to that. Let me read something to you that's a little bit different. I, search your name, do swear that I will, as a searcher for guns, swords, and other weapons among the slaves in my district, faithfully and as privately as I can, discharge the trust reposed in me as the law directs to the best of my power, so help me God. That was the slave patroller's oath in North Carolina in 1828. So as you start to think about the parallels in this where we sit in this profession, and I didn't start my conversation like I always do. I think the police profession is a noble one. I think the intent is noble. People that are willing to give their lives for the lives of others, I think is noble. But it is filled with human beings, right? And all human beings are flawed. So we'd be naive to think that the profession isn't. But let's think about that oath. I tell you now, after I was doing this research a couple of years ago, and I read that, I think about that oath every time I give the oath to one of my staff. And I think about, as a leader of an organization that has this responsibility, how do I lead in a way to make sure we do things fundamentally different that don't have that kind of impact? So I also want to talk a little bit about, think about what the slave patrollers' responsibilities were. They had three primary functions, right? And the first one was to chase down and apprehend runaway slaves and return them to the owners. To actually provide this form of terror to Blacks that were thinking about a slave revolt, to terrorize them, to prevent them from thinking about that, and to maintain some form of discipline amongst the slaves in the context of law and order. So I won't take you through every piece, but we know that we can go to all the way to the Black codes. Let's fast forward to the Black codes. So 13th Amendment's passed, abolishes slavery, and in Mississippi and South Carolina, they passed what was called the Black codes. So they were local state laws that really created indentured servants. It really restricted where Black folks could go, what kind of work they could do. It took away voting rights. It talked about where they could travel, and it actually seized their children for labor. The major enforcers of the Black codes were the local police. So then let's fast forward to Jim Crow, right? So Jim Crow, after the 14th Amendment, right? 1868 lasted about 100 years. So we know Jim Crow, right? Jim Crow was really designed to maintain separate spaces between Black and white, whether it's a school, a library, a restaurant, whatever it was. So the main institution that were enforcing those laws were the police. And the other thing that the police enforced was when whites in America felt that blacks were acting outside of the social norms, not the law, but their perception of the social norms, they called the police to put the black folks in order. So at the same time, where we had over 4,000 lynchings, it was the police that didn't enforce any of the mob rule that resulted in over 4,000 African Americans being lynched during that time frame. So while they were enforcing this quote unquote going outside the social norms, as reported by whites in America, they ignored or turned a blind eye, or in some instances participated in mob situations that resulted in major lynchings. And then we know what happens in the civil rights movement. And in the last 20 to 30 years, the whole driving while black situation and everything else that's resulted in disproportionate numbers of people of color in prison and jails in the court system, really perpetuated by our war on drugs. And think about when we say we're in a war on something. What's the thing about wars? The thing about wars is there's acceptable collateral damage, right? So if I'm in a war, I go into it understanding there will be acceptable collateral damage. And our country's war on drugs, which I will argue was first off wrong and shouldn't be a war, but also grossly ineffective, the collateral damage was black and brown communities. Poor communities, but specifically black and brown communities. And it manifests itself in the disproportionate numbers of folks in jail. And there was a study that said 1 out of every 3 African-American males could expect to spend some time in a correctional institution in their lifetime as a result of this type of effort. So we know it's not just law enforcement or the police. I think it's all the practices and the policies of the criminal justice system that has contributed to the racial disparities that we see today. So we know about the, like I talked about in terms of the overrepresentation of black and brown in our prisons. And we have to think about not just the police, but the entire system needs to be reformed. And I'll just argue this, not the entire system, but our societal basic assumptions about what law is, what order is, what equity is, who's dangerous to us. In our country, I'll just say this, I think we spend more time putting people in jail that we're mad at than who we're scared of. And oftentimes the anger is a subconscious or unconscious bias that has been perpetuated for centuries. And a couple more things, and I want to talk about the defunding, and I'll have a few minutes. There'll be some time for questions. So let's think about this as the politicians and everyone else has stepped up and really focused on law enforcement. Here's what I tell a lot of my colleagues when they bristle at being challenged by society now, right? You know, nobody wants to be the police and it's hard to recruit. And, you know, I'll just say in our profession, it's a woe is me. Why are they attacking us? Here's why. We know this, right? We are the only civilian profession that is legally authorized to use force and coercion to achieve our lawful objective, right? We're the only profession that the decisions that we make and the actions that we take fundamentally impact what we value most in our country. That's our freedom, and in some situations, our life. So I use this, and anybody that's heard me talk before probably is tired of this example, but here's the example I try to use. That if I have a plumbing problem and I call my plumber and he comes to my house and he doesn't sweat my pipes right because he's biased against something about me. Maybe it's my bald head or my glasses, whatever it is. He decides I'm not going to treat Jerry right. I'm not sweating those pipes right. He'll continue to have the leak. That's the worst that can happen to me. We'll continue to have the leak. My wife and I will find another plumber. We'll have somebody fix it. But if my police officer has a bias against me or my sons or my wife or whomever for whatever thing, they could actually lose their life. That's why it's so important, it's critical that we get this right. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, I believe we have to keep in mind is if our focus is just on the institution of policing, or even if we broaden it out and our focus is just on the criminal legal system, we're going to make a mistake and we're going to stay here. Because we know through history that law enforcement has been used as a tool by government officials, by other society members, to subvert the constitutional and civil rights of people of color for generations. So it's not just a police issue, it's a societal issue. And we know if I just focus on changing some policies or some laws that address policing and not the larger society about how we deal with each other, who we're afraid of, who we love, what our biases are, and all of that, it'll continue to perpetuate itself. You can't legislate against bias. We can try to identify it and educate ourselves and build strategies to mitigate it. But I can put the best policy in place. But if the culture of the sheriff's office is, this is the face of crime and here's who we need to search and put in jail, that's going to continue to happen regardless of policy. So that brings me to this last thing about police abolition, defund the police. I think there are a number of different ways that you look at it. And I've said this publicly. Look, if we got a better way, and the better way means you need less of us, I'm okay if you cut our budget to get to a better way. I'm all right with that. But whatever we do, we better be thoughtful about it. We better be smart about it. So there are a couple of ways that I've heard police abolitionists talk about these things, or just defunding the police. There's the random budget reduction, right? So they'll say, look, the sheriff's office is 50% of the county's general fund budget. I think it should be 40%. And then they randomly just cut 10% and put it somewhere else. So that's not strategic to me. I think that results in, first off, you're not solving what you need to solve, and it may cause more problems. Then there's this targeted services approach, right? It's surgical, but it's not strategic, where they say, you know what, we're going to reallocate money specifically for mental health. So I think that's surgical, right? Just for mental health. But it's not strategic because we haven't thought about everything else that contributes to some of the challenges we have in society. And then we could have the surgical and strategic. We'll do mental health, we'll have this continuum and all this other kind of stuff. And then the last one is totally reimagining. So let's think about the outcomes. Let's all get together. Let's just say, look, we co-produce public safety here. It's not just the police, it's not just the people. Let's get together and talk about what outcomes do we want. If we did everything right, the way we wanted to, the way we believe we should, consistent with our values. Let's not talk about what right is yet, but let's talk about what it would look like. What would the impact be? What would the impact be in our various communities with different social and economic challenges? What would the impact be on different people based on their ethnicity, or what we call the social construct of race, right? Let's think all that through, and then let's talk about the strategies we need to put in place. And then we can talk about the structure and the funding. That's the way I want to talk about reimagining. That's the way we thought about it in the sheriff's office. When we think about alternative responses, we think about, if I send somebody other than police, how is that going to change the experience for people? And how are we not going to do harm to the folks that we say we're trying to help? And then we think about the strategies to put in place and all that other kind of stuff. I will tell you what we don't start with. We don't start with the money first. Listen to me. And this is, I think, my humble opinion, the challenge with public sector work. They always start with the money. If I start all my conversations where we only got this much money, I've already restricted my creativity. I've already restricted how I think about things. Then the outcome that I'm focused on is staying within my budget. The outcome I'm focused on is not adding value in the community. I would argue that the public safety mental health millage passed where it did because we talked about outcomes. Look, folks, we want you to invest in us as a county, and here's the return on that investment. And then we talked about how we were going to do it. And guess what? 8 years from now, if we don't give you that return, then people don't invest that money again. So I'll end with this piece. You know, the George Floyd murder from last year, I think, was more than just a moment. I think all of us sitting there and watching someone kneel, one person kneel on another person's neck to his life expired, fundamentally shifted certain things in our society. And I hope it didn't shift for a moment, because we've had a lot of these moments that hasn't resulted in fundamental change. I hope what happened with with George Floyd and some of the Breonna Taylor and all the other ones actually has started a movement that helps us change and really sort of escorts us into a new era, right? A period where we have fundamental shifting of our basic assumptions about what public safety is, what the criminal legal system is, what right, what wrong is, and more importantly, how we view each other and how we interact with each other and how we value each other. And that we create a system that is really based on who we're afraid of in terms of predators, that I think is a small percentage, versus who we're, as opposed to who we're mad at. Those folks that we think have violated some social norm. So what questions do we have? I just tried to give you just a brief overview, tried to do as fast as I could. Hopefully.
We've got some questions. Thank you, Sheriff Clayton.
Okay.
The first question, how are you working with Chief Justice McCormick on working through addressing mental health issues other than incarceration? How can we do a better job helping those released, supporting them better in our community? This by one of our leaders in our mental health changes, Collier Smith.
So first off, so I was part of the jail and pretrial task force that the governor convened, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that Chief Justice McCormick, who I think we're all big fans of. I'll say this, so I've had a number of highlights in my career. One of my highlights is I got to do the nominating speech for the Chief Justice when she was just Bridget McCormick and she was running the first time. So that is a career highlight for me. So I've loved being a part of what she does. So, that jail and pretrial task force forwarded a lot of recommendations that went on and got passed into law with the legislature. Now that task force, the governor now has morphed it into what is now called the Michigan Jail Reform Advisory Council. So now it's actually an advisory council to the governor, and the Chief Justice is the chair of that council, and I've been fortunate enough to sit on that council. Specific to your questions around mental health, the governor has also decreed to community responders new training. So she wants a new training for not just police officers, but for HVA and for other community responders to destigmatize mental health, to recognize when someone's in mental health crises, to coordinate a response and co-response, and to de-escalate all the things that we know, as despite what we're trying to do upstream and have people not end up in mental health crisis and need our first responder, we know that that's going to happen, to better train our folks. So we are developing that training right now. It will be rolled out this summer, and police agencies and first responders across the state will be able to partake in that training this fall. So that's one thing. The other thing that in Washtenaw County specifically, we're not working directly with the Chief Justice, but we do work very closely with Trish Cortez and her team at Community Mental Health. We are planning what's called a continuum of community responders, where you may have someone may call 911 and you may get Trish's team respond, a clinician. You may get a police officer because maybe there's a nexus to crime. We're working on what we call a co-response, where we're putting a clinician and a police officer in the car together so they can respond. And we're also working on a coordinated response, where her team may respond, but it might require the police. Then they come, the police may respond, and they need clinicians. So we're building all of that in Washtenaw County now.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, Arthur Williams says that he was reviewing President Barack Obama's task force on the 21st century policing and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And his questions are, the task force recommends law enforcement culture should embrace a guardian mindset to build public trust and legitimacy. For that end, police and sheriff departments should adopt procedural justice as the guiding principle for internal and external policies and practices to guide their interactions with the citizens they serve. Can you comment on how Washtenaw Sheriff's Department deals with that culture in your department? Hold that question. And his second question, so one, that culture, that law enforcement agencies should acknowledge the role of policing in past and present injustice and discrimination. And how is that a hurdle? And how it's a hurdle? to the promotion of community trust, and how's the department addressing past and present injustices and discrimination that impact on community trust?
Great question, great compound question. Let me take the latter first. The last one was around culture, so I've always recognized that. So I've been in office now 13 years. We started 13 years ago, really focusing on the culture. Understanding that we can't be successful without a partnership with the community. Understanding when we took office that there was a frayed relationship with the community because of some things that had happened with the Clifton Lee death and a bunch of other things. And you have to work inside out and outside in on the culture. And the first thing is changing your basic assumption. So the basic assumption in the sheriff's office is that we're here to serve. So we've adopted all of the 21st century stuff from President Obama's task force. Matter of fact, he personally gave us a shout out when we convened our 21st Century Compliance Commission, which is really designed to evaluate all of the recommendations in that report, and then make recommendations on how we get better. So think about this. Our commission is made up of some of our staff, some community stakeholders, but more importantly, it's made up of just regular community members that get to examine our policy, they get to see our training, they get to understand operational protocol. Then they get to make recommendations of how we make that better. Let me just say this, when that report came out in 2015, it was groundbreaking, but it also, let's just be honest, it was the minimum of what we should be doing anyway. So now, in 6 years later, I was just in a meeting last week with some of the members of that task force that basically said what's in that report is just the basics. We should be achieving, striving for higher. So we're trying to do that in the sheriff's office. We are focused on culture because culture is what makes the big difference. And we also know that culture is the hardest thing to change. I can write a policy, me and the undersheriff, we can roll it out in a couple of days. But to change people's fundamental thought process and their culture and the values of what really influences behavior, that's what takes months, if not years, of continual and intentional effort to get people to think and behave differently. So we're knee deep in that, and we'll continue focus on culture for as long as I remain in this position.
Thank you. Okay, Peter Eberbach asks, are you on board with the county prosecutor bail policy as enacted so far? Any difference of opinion so far?
So this is what I've said about all the policies. So ideologically, yeah, I don't disagree. The policy doesn't mean anything until you start acting on it, until people start executing. So, and remember, the prosecutor is just one part of this. So the prosecutor can say all day he's not going to ask for bail. Prosecutor doesn't set bail, the judge does. So it's the judge that decides whether they're going to do impose a cash bail or not. So philosophically, from an ideological standpoint, yes, I think a lot of the direction that they're going in makes sense. Now I'm starting to see the execution of some of these policies. I'm gonna be very frank with you. Some of them concern me. And I think there's a balance that we have to strike. But all in all, yeah, I'm right there with them.
Thank you. I have one question. Do you have a stop time at 1:30 or can we go a little over?
I can go as long as you can go.
Okay. Can you comment on so here's what we'll do. I'll have you answer one more question, then I will conclude the meeting for people who need to get off, and then we'll keep you for a little bit longer if you don't mind.
Oh, that's good. That's perfect.
Okay. Can you comment on the 1033 program, and do you participate in the plan?
No, we don't. We have in the past. The sheriff's office has in the past. I remember way back, almost 20 years ago, when I was on the SWAT team, driving all the way up to Selfridge to look for stuff. We don't now, and we won't. I'll say this though. This, like many other things, becomes these talking points. Let me go back to culture. So because we have a Metro SWAT team, right? So we have a Metro tactical team made up of a bunch of different agencies. With our Metro team, we have what's called an armored personnel vehicle, right? So it's an armored personnel vehicle that can take our staff in and out of zones if somebody's shooting at them that won't get hit. Now, if you see it going down the street, it's really aggressive looking. But we've had a couple situations. The last one we had with the barricaded gunman that had the 36-hour standoff, that equipment allowed our staff to get closer to the house, to drop things off, to try to talk to him and get back without getting shot. Now, we don't use it as an aggressive, as an offensive weapon. We use it as a defensive shield to protect our staff to get in position. So we don't participate in it. We haven't signed on to it. We won't. But I just want us to be really, really, again, thoughtful about how we think about all of these things, because I think sometimes there's some nuance there that if people understood the nuance, they say, oh, okay, I can see where you might use this here, but you can't use it every day, something, along those lines.
Thank you. We'll pick up your questions in a moment. So I had a different quote for today, but I decided after listening to you, Sheriff Clayton, to go with one that I've used before that I really like a lot. But before the quote, next week, Rotarians, we have what's sounds to be a really fun, interesting program from Andy Wood. He's a native Ann Arborite, a homegrown guy, grandson of Bob Ufer, and he was on Jeopardy when Alex Trebek was still alive, and he's heading to the Tournament of Champions. And he is speaking on his experience on Jeopardy. So that sounds a little different and kind of fun. So the quote that I decided to go with today from George Bernard Shaw, I've said it before, and I think we need to keep it in our frontal lobes. Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. I want you to have a great week, Rotarians, those who need to leave us, and I will see you next week. And so now, Sheriff, Marsha Lane writes that she caught something on the news about a grant that was made by Southeast Michigan Community Foundation to fund what sounded like police reform. Can you tell us anything about that?
I can. I'm fortunate enough to sit on the advisory group for that board. So it's the Southeast Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan and Hudson Weber. They've got a couple $100,000, and essentially what is happening is communities that are thinking about certain reforms. Sometimes money is the obstacle, so they have to petition to the foundation what their plans are around the reforms. We review the plans to see if it's consistent with the criteria that's been established, and we just awarded the first round. I think it was to 4 or 5 communities. And then we just got notice that the second round is going to be solicited. So I would anticipate in another month or so, we'll reconvene to look at the next set of proposals. I'll say it this way. Here's how I started. I read them all. Some of them seemed okay. But I'll just say this, none of them, I'm being just honest, I think all of them worth the investment. But in all honesty, we're really talking about structural change requires, I think, such a long-term strategic approach to this that is multi-layered. So one initiative will not change the organizational culture of any organization, right? It may contribute to it. What I did not see is, tell me how this one initiative fits in your larger architecture of cultural change in your organization. Once we get to that, I'll be a lot more maybe jazzed up about what's possible.
Fair enough. Mary Stefik Blasky asks, what is it like to recruit new officers today? What kinds of challenges, etc.?
It's always been a challenge, right? And it's been a challenge, I'll say it in a number of different ways. So it's always been a challenge when you try to have it the highest standards, right? So I'll go back to outcomes again. We're very clear about the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We have a lot of clarity regarding the behavior that we want our staff to exhibit to get to those outcomes. And understanding how we want our staff to behave has given us insight and informed us on the competencies we're looking for when we hire folks. So we hire differently. I'll be honest. The way we were hired, way sheriff's office hired when I got hired is a 180 from the way we hire. I would like to hope I'd get hired today, but they were looking for different things, to be honest with you. So the recruiting is different, and it's challenging in a number of different ways. I think because of the national rhetoric around the police, because of, I think that so here's the interesting part. I think this generation really is motivated to serve. So we talk a lot about service. So we get folks that come to us, not because they're going to make more money. You actually will make a little less money. You work for the county than if you work for the city or some other places. But when I ask folks, well, why you come to us? They say, we come to you because of the mission and the values. We do this Beyond the Badge series. Google Washtenaw County Beyond the Badge and look at some of our videos we've done. That really is not this live action cops thing. It's really about articulating your values. And that really has resonated with a lot of the folks that we have hired. So yes, it is a challenge, but it's always been a challenge. And it's made even tougher because we have a very clear picture of who we want to join our organization.
It all makes sense. All right, Leo Shedden says, can you comment on the quote Ferguson effect, i.e. when there is a bright light on policing, day-to-day policing moves a bit to the sidelines, crime goes up. Ferguson, Missouri, and Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah, so I don't know if there might be a correlation there to some degree. I don't know if there's causation. We see it now. So we get offended. Some in the profession get offended when the people question what we do. And I think that sometimes we're our own worst enemy in the profession. My belief is that people are supposed to question what we do. We get our power from you. So we shouldn't be doing on to you, we should be doing with you. So if we're doing with you and you say, I don't like the way you're doing it, then we should back up and let's figure out how we do it. I think sometimes the questioning of police is unfair. It's stereotypical, and it's wrong. And I think that gets mixed in with the legitimate questions, and that causes a lot of consternation in the profession. And we do see disengagement. So we have seen where the police will slow down. Like, oh, you don't want us to do traffic stops? We won't do traffic stops. You don't want us to do searches? Then we won't do searches. That kind of stuff. So you start to see that. And you start to see that flavor. You start to see a flavor where there's no enforcement on gun laws in the community. If the bad guys think they can operate and have violence with guns and other things with no consequences, then some of them are going to do that. So you start to see where police start to step back. They start to step back their presence, their activity. You sometimes will see a slight uptick in crime. I do want to just frame it with this. For almost a decade and a half, crime continued to go down. But the rating of police stayed the same. So think about that. Crime was going down across the country, but how people felt about the police stayed pretty stagnant. Now you're starting to see how people feel about the police has gone even lower than it was when it was stagnant. Now you're starting to see crime go up. Will it continue in this way? I don't know. I'm hopeful that we get past this whole defund, and we not in the sense that we don't talk about it anymore, but we do it in a smart way, and we can start to right size again and focus on what we should be focusing on, keeping our communities safe.
Thank you. So Fan Zhang says his firm has an office on the corner of State and Eisenhower, and for the past few years, it's been very safe. However, a couple weeks ago, 2 shootings occurred, a Briarwood Mall and a hotel parking lot within the span of 7 days. Do you see that as an unlucky occurrence or a sign of growing unrest in our community?
No, I don't think, quite frankly, 2 incidents makes a trend. I think we need to, so we look at that, right? But let's look at crime across the board in the county. So throughout last year, and I think this is the COVID effect, all crime categories saw a significant reduction except for domestic assault. So we had those two incidents that occur. I think here's what it should remind all of us. I think Washtenaw County is an extremely safe community. I think Ann Arbor City is an extremely safe city, but there's no such thing, there's no such place where that is immune to the kind of crime that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. So do I think this is a trend? Not really, but I think it's a reminder that we all need to be, just aware of our space, aware of our surroundings. We all should have some investment in how we keep each other and ourselves safe. That I think is the takeaway from what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. So Don Dietrich or Rosemarie Roney or both said yesterday Pittsfield Township voters defeated a public safety proposal. It's very unusual for a township proposal to fail. Is this part of the defund mindset? Well,
you know what? You just gave me a bit of news that I didn't know. I'm being very honest with you. I didn't. That's oh, wow. I don't know. Let me just say, I hope not. Listen, I'm going to say it again. Because we've got that same conversation going on in Ann Arbor around defund or disarm unarmed response and all that. I think we need to have that discussion, but let's think about this very, very thoughtfully. And here's my concern. So I hear the defund, and then I go to some of the communities that we serve, and they're like, nah, Sheriff, we want y'all here. We want y'all here. What we're saying is we want y'all here, but we want you to work with us. We want your staff to treat us with respect. We'll treat you with respect, that kind of stuff. Can we find a way where the police don't respond to everything? Yeah, I think so. I support that. I'll give you an example. Say we have someone that's on the street corner or in the street, wherever, and they're talking to themselves, right? They're having a conversation with themselves. Maybe they're really demonstrative. They're doing all this kind of stuff. Should the police get called to that? That's all they're doing. Now, some of us walking down the street might feel a little uncomfortable walking past someone who's talking to himself, having a conversation with himself, and is flailing their hand. That's not illegal. That's not suspicious. It may be unusual, but it's not suspicious or it's not illegal. Maybe that person is on the verge of a breakdown or a crisis. That's the time we should be able to pick up the phone and call a clinician maybe to come and see if they can provide that person some support. Don't need to call the police in that. Now, similar scenario where now maybe there's a physical altercation that ensues, where there's an assault and a battery. Now there's a nexus to a crime there. That's what police respond to. There's behavior that's a nexus to a crime or behavior that puts someone else or themselves in physical harm, jeopardy. That's when the police should come. So we should just think these things through and build the model that discerns, that breaks those things down. Then we need to train our dispatchers to ask the right questions and to be able to figure all that out and then dispatch the right resource. And let me add the last piece. And then as a community, we must be willing to fund all those alternative responders, right? And you can't just take 3 or 4% from the police to fund a whole new structural system. That's not going to work. We have to be willing to make those initial investments. But if we want to just stop the police from responding without investing in the other areas, we're going to cause harm to folks that we didn't mean to cause. So I don't know all the dynamics in the whole what happened in Pittsfield, but I'll just say this. I hope it's not a trend that is going to start, because you know how these things go, how the pendulum swings. And if the pendulum swings too far one way, I'm concerned about the unintended consequences that may occur.
All right, so Rotarians, I'm going to tell you, we're not going to get through all your questions today because we're using up a chunk of the sheriff's time at number one. And number two, quite honestly, the president has to go on another meeting. But let's do maybe one more. And
Okay.
then they're just going to have to message you Do you identify any improvements in the state and federal law enforcement agencies?
Do I see any?
Well, Eldon Berry asked, do you identify any improvements in the state and federal law enforcement agencies?
I'll just say this. Yes, I've had conversations with a number of what I think are forward-leaning leaders that I think are thinking about the right things. And I'm hopeful that we'll see some progress at a state and local level. But let me also be very, very honest with you. There are a lot of those folks that occupy that space that hear all the things that are going on, and they're not looking to be progressive in that way, and that concerns me. So I think there's a lot of work for all of us to do. I think some are more willing to lean into that work than others.
Okay, can you do one more question?
I can.
Leo asks, is it fair or helpful to point out that for many years, US homicides were at about 17,000 per year, with about 1,000 involving police, i.e. about 6%. Does this context help in your communications efforts?
Yeah, I think we have to look at all those numbers. So we need to put it in context, right? And I think what the numbers that were being quoted were 17,000 homicides, 1,000 of them at the hands of police, right? Interactions with the police. So that number is significant. The other number that I don't have this number, the other number are the hundreds of thousands of contacts that happen every day, right? So there are hundreds and thousands of police community member contacts that happen that end in a peaceful way. Now, do not mistake, I'll say this, any police contact with a member of our community that results in a death is a tragedy. Excuse me, whether it was legally allowed or not. So any death is a tragedy, but if it's in the context of the police and community member, that's really a tragedy. But some of them, quite frankly, are explainable. If the person they're trying to make contact with is demonstrating the kind of behavior that puts others at risk, then the police have an obligation to initiate contact. But we've seen enough video where, quite frankly, we can argue that the behavior they were confronting did not put other people at risk, did not put them at risk, and people died as a result of it. And that is what we have to stop.
Okay, I keep saying this will be the last question. Now, this will be the last question because quite honestly, it is the last question. There
Okay.
were other messages going on. Thank you for being here and all kinds of things. I never know if they're questions or what. Do you have programs or relationships with local churches? Joe Fitzsimmons asks.
We do. We have a number of different programs that we do with churches, whether, reading programs or just community-based programs. We're really active with the churches through COVID, in helping giving out essentials and things of that nature, using our mobile command vehicle as a rallying point for people to give things out. And, oftentimes we'll bring our clergy, our religious, our spiritual leaders, really just for consultation, to have this conversation. Like leading up to the George Floyd, we met with some of the spiritual religious leaders and said, look, if it's a not guilty, man, we're going to have significant reaction in the community. How are we going to handle that? And we need your help. Y'all are community-based leaders. How do we talk about that? So there, last year, after George Floyd, after the incident we had, I'll go to some of those folks. They'll come to me and they'll say, look, here's what my congregation's saying to me, Sheriff. I need you to educate me so I can educate them. Or I need you to come talk to our folks. Or when the Muslim community felt under attack, I came and met. We would meet with them to talk about how we help keep them safe. When the Jewish community felt they were under attack, we would meet with them to talk about how we can keep them safe. So yeah, there's always that connection. I think it's extremely important.
Thank you. Okay, that is the last question. It was wonderful. Thank you for your service, not only as our sheriff, but on all the other good things you're doing around the board, on boards, around the community, in our nation, etc. We are ever so grateful.
Thank you so very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Y'all keep doing what you're doing. We will get this. We'll turn this thing around. Right? We'll get our world back on this right axis. So thank you so very much. All of you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think so.
Hi, hey, Joanne, is it possible to send out an email with a Saturday breakfast events information? Because when I sign off the Zoom, I'm gonna lose all that information.
Yeah, Lori, how can we do that?
Hello. You know what? I'll get with Dan. I'm gonna cut right now. I'm gonna copy rather what Dan Romanchik posted. But yeah, Fen, we'll get that out, or Fan, I'm sorry, Fan. We will get that out somehow so that folks can participate in that. Saturday, so it was Saturday morning, 9 a.m. at Vets Park.
At the pavilion at Vets Park.
Yeah, and I think Dan's bringing some stuff from Washtenaw Dairy, some donuts. But yeah, I think we can probably just send out a, if you're okay with it, Joanne, we can send out a email invite to membership, current membership. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it's great by me.
Okay. All right. You should be getting that probably tomorrow, Fan, okay?
Okay, just remember, I'm not a current member, so you might need to specifically CC me.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I will make sure that you get one.
You have his email, Lori?
Yeah, if yeah, I'm 99% sure I do. Yeah, because there's a, yeah, because you got the invite for the link today. Yeah, so I do have your email. So it'll probably, what we may do, yeah, okay, I'll take care of it. Don't worry.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, guys.
Okay, you too. Thanks.
All right, people, got a boogie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.